why is it so hard for so many leaders to get their heads around what
Yeah.
organizational culture is?
Yeah.
Start with that.
That's a great question. Yeah, it sort of feels like a little bit of an enigma, doesn't it? Because we know that it matters. So if we know that it matters, why haven't we figured it out? And so that's one of the things that I've just been interested in my whole career. And I think there are some kind of fundamental aspects of culture itself that make it really hard for us to take action on it and really make a difference and change it. So I think there are some aspects having to do with the fact that once you're part of a culture, it's really hard for you to see it. And I think people think, oh no, I'm aware. I'm paying attention to what's going on around me. I can see it. But actually, there's lots of evidence and proof that once you become part of it, you're almost blind to it. It becomes so accepted, so natural, so much of just what we do that you can't even see it. So if you think about being in an organization and wanting to maybe work on culture, it's really hard when you aren't as objective about it as you might think. So there's an analogy of, do goldfish even know they're swimming in water? And so that's kind of what culture is like. It's the water we swim in. It's our natural surroundings. And, we can never ask the goldfish. I don't know, all these animal analogies that we can't really validate. Maybe the goldfish does, but the idea of it's hard to see. And on top of that, for leaders experience culture in different ways than the rest of the employees do. And I have to show people and talk to leaders about that and help them understand that because they just have a hard time believing that that's the case, right? But when you have power, people treat you differently. And I think that we sort of know that objectively, but we want to believe that we're different. Each of us is different, right? That, no, I'm welcoming and I'm kind and I listen to people. They're not going to treat me different just because I have power. Well, that's not the case. I remember when I got a big promotion, I was working at Microsoft and my title changed. I had been running this team for a while, but my title changed. I literally had significant differences in how people were interacting with me and people who were reaching out to me who never reached out to me before. And it was really apparent to me in that moment, right when it happened. But then I sort of forgot about it, right? That people treat me differently. So the experience that leaders have with culture is very different. And so when they are thinking about, should we work on culture? Do we need to do anything about culture? They might say, well, I think it's pretty good. My experience of it isn't so bad, and might not be motivated to change it. So there's so many other reasons. And one more I'll throw in there. It's hard work. Culture work is hard work. It takes a long time. It's a long-term commitment. And that's another bit of a deterrent for organizations to work on it, because it takes a long time.
Burnout to me is doing the same thing and staying stuck. That is like, this isn't working at all. It means that there's a better way. I need to discover it. I can't see it, but it's my job to find it. But there's a lot in there about trusting the struggle and come out the other side. Why do we make it bad? Why, I think we're taking struggle away from kids and they're not ready for adulthood. Mm-hmm. And now adults, we're talking culturally, at least in the United States, that struggle is bad. My gosh, it's not. It's how we grow physically, emotionally, mentally. Talk a little bit about that because you've definitely gone through a lot of this.
Yeah, I have. And I had this phrased really well. I was just thinking of this as you were explaining that. It reminded me of a conversation I had the other day, an interview that I was doing on Who Made You the Boss with one of my dearest friends and mentors. Her name is Shannon Miles. And she brought up, I said, how did you take the risk to start your company? They did it during a time where their kids were so young and it was the Great Recession and they both quit their jobs on the same day, she and her husband. And she said, people forget that it's also a risk to stay where you are. And that resonated, right? Like it is, you've got to weigh the risk that you're taking. You've got to think about the fact that like, if you're struggling here, the fear might be that you're going to struggle over there too. If you think you're okay here, the fear is that you're taking a risk by leaving, but you're actually taking a risk by staying rooted in that wrong position. And I think about that now. Gosh, I thought that made such a big impact because yes, there have been those times that we've struggled. My husband is my business partner. We were 5 months pregnant when the pandemic hit. All eggs in one basket, meaning that we were, in this travel agency together, which is not the best business to have in a pandemic. And we had to walk away from our home to keep our business alive. Like, we had to make some very painful choices because we could see the future. And to your point, I think I had as hard as that time was, and man, it was really hard. It was 18 months of in the red, and every day opening our spreadsheet and going, how much longer can we last? Oh, there's more government assistance. Okay, cool. That bought us another 3 months, like really having to make those constant daily decisions that can really start eroding your patience and your resilience over time. But having the big picture understanding that this is not happening to us, but this is happening for us. And that was, I would say, and I come from a faith background, I'm a Christian, and I was able to really apply a faith lens on that and say, okay, I know as hard as this is, I know I'm going to be able to use it on the other side to help others, to grow ourselves, to grow the business. And now, of course, in retrospect, wow, that was what catapulted us completely. That got us the opportunity to acquire another company. We just landed number 255 on the Inc. 5000 list for fastest growing companies in the US. And that to me is so wild, would have never happened without that struggle.
So you've founded a pretty big organization. You're doing lots of stuff all over the world. How's that impacted your ability to do this? I mean, you've got a lot of balls in the air, and I think your emotional energy has a pretty big part in how you're able to keep it together and energize your team to run after it. But describe that.
So I do wear a lot of hats, and one of them is a crown. So it's or a tiara or something, because owning a castle takes a lot of energy. But I focus on the moment. I focus on the business to hand. I probably at any one time, I'm putting 70% of my time into maybe the largest business that I'm running, but it's always about making sure that I am igniting a team and allowing the leadership of those teams that run each business to run that business. And that means it takes a bit of time in between when you open one company to opening another company to make sure you get the right team leaders in place. And I give them a lot of leeway. When I have somebody that isn't working out, I'm very quick to say, this is not working out. We are not going to be working together. But when you do have someone come in, I don't undermine them. I don't step over them. At least I try not to. I try not to say anything directly to other employees or staff or coworkers or however you want to word it that would undermine that of those team leaders. So it's setting the tone down from the top and making sure that you're hiring like-minded people. So I look for skills in people. They must have the skills. But when I talk to them, or one of our leaders talks to hiring someone, we're looking for values. So they've got the skills, but we hire for values.
Yeah. It seems like you get hired for what you know and fired for who you are. In a lot of cases, you don't really fit the culture. Do you have a chief of staff that helps you hold all of this together?
I do have one person that in the main business and operating a castle, and she is probably the one that argues with me the most and tells me that I do everything wrong. So she is somebody I will say, well, look, why don't we give this person a raise? And she'll bring me to a point and say, if you give that person a raise, you're going to have to give everybody a raise, because it's not fair to single people out. And it's not fair also in the other sense that if I were to say to someone, look, I need to talk to that person, she'll bring me down and say, you need to be that way with everybody. So she'll look at things from another point of view where I'm just not as much a manager as I might be a leader. So she helps me to look at the managerial side of it and the HR side of everything.
Yeah. Well, I view you in the research for this conversation as a very strong leader with an amazing vision of where you want to go, and you've done sounds like a good job of putting a team in place to be able to execute on all of this stuff. And I think one of the challenges in compensating team members is, how do you pay them fairly, relatively across the board, for the value they're actually creating? Factoring in supply and demand and wages in a particular region. So it's hard to get it right, but it sounds like you've got a team member that's making sure that we are equitable across the board in terms of paying for outcomes that they're achieving. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and when it looks at compensating people, and I look at that more of the transactional part of a relationship than the transformational part of a relationship with an employee, we pay what is the fair wages and give the benefits, etc., that they would get in the same region or same territory or that is expected where they're living. And I do operate businesses in 4 different countries. So there is a difference between country to country to country of what the expectations are. And I've had to learn that the hard way. So generally in a different country, I will hire counsel that will help me through the understanding of how a business is run. But we do compensate at 2 different times of the year for performance, one for performance of an employee. So that's over and above what their salary would be. And one is for the performance of the company. But the employee has to have been with the company for the 6 months prior to get that reward. And so if they should leave, they're going to lose out on their 6-month reward, which would be based on the 6 months prior of the business. So there are reasons to say that are transactional, but as long as you're fair, then people will stay for the softer reasons because they like the organization, the cultural reasons.
I love your story of your upbringing. It's not, obviously our families were a little different in terms of the messages that we got, but because I came from very little, or at least perceptually very little. I think honestly, we were probably always middle class, but because my parents were raised, with very little, it always felt like we had a lack of. And if I wanted something, I had to get it myself. And so like your value creation story was very similar to mine. Maybe it was $1 an hour when I was a babysitter at, 11 years old in Germany. But I always found a way, and I was very scrappy. I was really independent. I was wildly ambitious and really competitive. And when I entered the corporate world, those characteristics were more aligned to leaders who were all men, right? But the expectation of what the stereotype of a woman was that soft, kind, collaborative, supportive. And so I tell the story in the book. And again, the reason I say this is because this may be where the difference lies. Yeah. Again, whether you're in a corporation or an entrepreneur, the perception of how I was supposed to act as a woman and as a leader was always at odds with that internal ambition and drive and aggressive nature that I came into the world with, whether it was bred or born, I don't know. But I was called very early in my career in my 20s, that Jennifer Shear, she's like a cupcake with a razor blade inside.
Yeah.
And when I use that example, and that was 28 years ago, but when I use that example, women approach me all the time and say, I was called a velvet hammer. I was called a bulldog in a skirt. I was called a bulldozer in a field of daisies. And they relate to that story. And the men look at me like, wow, it must be really hard to be you.
Going back to the book, showing up as you think you should show up, what you think you're supposed to be versus your authentic self trying to create value. I think that's where the miss happens completely. Talk about that, because that myth that you mentioned in the book about, fake it till you make it and all that, I've never seen that work anywhere. So talk about that for a bit.
Well, you mentioned two things that, one is that authenticity piece. Yeah. And then the two is what I'll call recognized confidence. They're both in the book, but let me just tease them apart. The authenticity piece, and this is, again, why, especially kind of growing up in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, really up until, COVID, and especially when you layer on any other form of what I call intersectionality, whether it's race, ethnicity, sexuality, even age or disability, it becomes that much harder. But it was this sense that we as women leaders have had to contort ourselves over many, many years to try and fit in, right? And when you're one of the only, That's really the only choice you have. So whether it was kind of how we dressed with the shoulder pads and the suits, and at one point women were wearing ties, or executive presence, if they could just have more executive presence, or if they could just be more confident like we are. And so there's been this contortion of how we dress, wear our hair, how we talk to try and fit in. I think COVID really helped with that, as we actually saw the characteristics of leaders who were more successful in that COVID environment versus less. Leaders that didn't pretend to have all the answers, leaders that were curious, collaborative, authentic, inclusive, transparent. Those characteristics really tend to favor, when we look at our leadership data, women over men. That doesn't make men bad leaders. It means that women are uniquely positioned to shine, especially in these crazy times of uncertainty and change, which we know are continuing to accelerate. So for the first time, perhaps we could take a deep breath and say, well, wait a minute. We don't have to hide the fact that we're mothers because our kids are running all over the screen, or that we have responsibilities with pets or elders, or that we're taking more time to engage with our teams and handle the mental health care disproportionately. But you know what? We're getting exhausted and it's burning us out. So this whole idea of how do we show up in our authenticity became a real theme that I think we can now capitalize on and not go backward. So let me pause there, and then I can talk about this imposter syndrome or fake it till you make it.
You talk about understanding the reality in your book, understanding the realities of work and the environment that you're going to be working in. Why has everybody become such an expert on pointing out the problems everywhere, what's wrong with people and things, and why stuff won't work, instead of course, it's not perfect, and now I get to contribute to making it better?
Yeah. It's funny because I always liked a lot of problems at work because I felt like it was job security for me, right? I felt like, ooh, if there's a lot of problems here, that means there's people who are dumber than me who work here. And also I won't be out of a job because there's a lot to work on and fix. And I think now one of the things that happens a lot at work is, people spend more time just complaining about the people of it all, versus, hey, there's a problem here. This person isn't at their operating at their best. How do we get them there? This product isn't doing what we thought it should do. How do we get it there? And just that tweak in orientation from this isn't, this shouldn't, this is bad, just the talking of it to the doing something about it. I think it can make all the difference, because what you realize is if you just start doing small incremental things, you can create a lot of value and you can have a lot of impact.
Yeah, I like thinking about it as we have all these, structural functions, departments, teams within an organization. How is each one designed to create value? And then how are we measuring that? And is it driving the majority of the right behaviors? And then my next question is always, what's the best work we can do to increase the value that we're creating as a team?
Exactly.
100% in there. So embracing failure, playing hurt, I've learned, and I love it, to trust the struggle. Like the harder it gets, I get this feeling inside, oh my gosh, it's going to be so good when I come out the other side.
Yes, exactly.
Talk about
That's
that a little.
Great phrase. Yeah, trust the struggle, trust the process. It's hard. Things that are hard, I think ultimately are greatly worth it if you can stick with them. And there's obviously exceptions to that. But, I think what's hard right now, I think for folks, is having the patience and the confidence and the humor to struggle. And, the speed of the world is so fast. You can just chat GPT something you used to, you or I 20, 30, 40 years ago, we're struggling through stuff. Now you type in a prompt and it spits itself out for you. So I think the inclination to struggle, the tolerance of struggle has gotten very low. And I think that's very dangerous because struggle creates resilience. And if you are not resilient, you really, and I write a lot about this, if you aren't resilient, if you can't play hurt, you will never be great, because you will yes, you might keep moving up, but then you will get to a point where you're deeply challenged and you will not have the struggle to learn from, because struggles yield all sorts of learnings, and they may not show themselves right away and they may not add up just so, but struggle is a huge way to build skill. And I wish people would flip their thinking on that.
I've heard you talk in other interviews around having a culture of innovation and having encouraging all the team members to come up with ideas for new business lines, brands, things that we can do. That has to help a lot. So talk about that and how you drive the innovation and get them in the game. And I mean, I've always wanted all of my team members, and I still do today, to act like the CEO of their own role and run a little business within a business. What are you doing there? It sounds like you have something very similar.
Yeah, so the first thing is that the whole impetus for us to pivot was rooted in the fact that our largest business used to be that relocation business I was talking about. Today, it's already not our largest business. Our information management business is larger. However, we know that we need to still expand into other areas to compensate for the fact that that still large business has gotten smaller. And it just so happens that innovation and new ideas is one of my favorite things anyway. I think that creative solutions to customer problems is nothing more interesting or rewarding than that. So what we did is we've done things in the past. For example, one of our 5 corporate values, we call it open-minded, and it really is about innovating and finding better ways to do things for customers and for ourselves. So annually, we've given it an award globally for each of our values, and open-minded has been one of them. However, in 2025, this is our 60th anniversary as a company, and because my father was known as a pioneer, and he's a wonderful creative thinker, and he quickly identifies opportunities that suit us and suit the market. He's kind of a superpower of his. We thought, what if we celebrate our original pioneer, which was him, and create something a few initiatives that will really put the spotlight on our need to pivot from our heritage business to something new that we're well equipped to do. And so we came up with a few things. We started out the year by introducing something that we called Innovation Fridays. It doesn't have to be on a Friday, but it was 2 hours where teams were given to just get together and brainstorm. They could do it independently, but we really encourage kind of cross-team collaboration because that diversity in thinking really helps. And I think people just liked the idea of being able to being given permission to shift gears. By Friday, you're tired. And because some of our offices are hybrid, we do kind of encourage people to do it when they're together. So it may not be Friday. But so that was one thing. And then one that we're really excited about is in honor of our aforementioned founder, we did something called the Crown Pioneer Challenge. And it was a little bit like Shark Tank, or abroad they call it Dragon's Den, that TV show where people come and pitch ideas. And so the first thing that we did is we handpicked a group of mid to senior level managers to be our dragons or Shark Tank. And we gave them the brief. We told them, what we're looking for is an external proposition, not a way to do our business better internally, but something we could bring to market. And these people that were the panel of judges, they did not disappoint. They came from all different parts of the company, from IT to different business units. Some people were in technology. They really scrutinized the entries very thoroughly. And I don't know how it happened, but we got a lot of entries into it. And so they had to make the difficult decision of who were the finalists. And then we had our executive leadership team and our executive board be the final judges of those 5 entries. And I think I don't know why it was so taken up, but I think maybe it was the opportunity to get visibility to the most senior people at the company. It gave a lot of credibility to the contest, and there was a little bit of prize money, but not so much that you could retire from it. And I think it was also just the pride in knowing that if I win, the company's really going to do this because we made that commitment at the outset. And so we just actually completed the process and we voted, and it's very transparent what the scores were. And we had feedback sessions with each of the teams. And, we have 3 winners that are going to now have proofs of concept one in India, one in New Zealand, and one in Mexico. So, very, very great. It was funny. There's one office that told me after watching the video recording of the awards and the description of the top 3 winners, they, for the first time, went off and did their Innovation Fridays because they were so inspired by what had the ideas that the teams had come up with. So, I think that what we need to do is really prove to our employees that 1, we value it, and we did that by having all these senior people involved, and 2, that something's actually going to come of it, and 3, you have permission to think out of a box, right? We've been open about it's not, the most important thing is not whether this idea works. It's that you put rigor behind it. You did research, you have a business case for it, and you can speak to it. You can argue it to senior people. So I think that just created an environment where people were comfortable thinking differently.
I'm really curious for the listeners. Where did you get the entrepreneurial bug, or how did it develop? Was there
I grew up here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and my dad was a business guy. He did insurance sales and pensions and things like that. And he was a big inspiration. He just passed in January, and it's allowed me a chance to kind of reflect on that gift of, driving me to school and giving me math problems and telling me, about the deal he just closed and, kind of an attitude of always be working it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then I went to Stanford undergrad, and this was in the early 80s. The PC revolution was just starting to happen. I know that sounds like an anachronistic phrase, but if you were around back then, you might have heard that.
I was.
And I got out of, I went to business school sometime after I graduated from undergrad, also at Stanford, and there's a lot of emphasis on entrepreneurism, as you could well imagine. I didn't go into it right away. I went into marketing. But while I was at Stanford undergrad, I started a business selling yogurt, frozen yogurt. And that was probably the first time I really had to be in charge of marketing and hiring and pricing and all of that. And then after business school, I did marketing, and then the internet happened. And I say that because I had to tell my kids, you don't understand. The internet happened. I had no idea I'd be an entrepreneur, but then the internet happened.
Yeah.
And given my deep experience in marketing and brand, I was in a good place to take advantage of it.
Yeah. But selling yogurt, like that's an option instead of working in the library or some local restaurant or something. And that was a choice, right? That's an option.
Oh yeah, no, I had to bid for the opportunity and put together the team. And I like the fact, and I still like the fact that as an entrepreneur, you basically decide when you want to work on and when.
Mm-hmm.
And that flexibility, I think for women is really nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I remember back in the day as the internet was coming along, I still remember somebody asking me, do you have an email address? And my response was, what is that?
Well, I saw the internet. I remember it pretty cleanly in early 1994, and I was working at AAA at the time here in Northern California. And I was reading a book called The One-to-One Future, which was about marketing using fax and audio text. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I saw the internet, and I knew it would change everything.
You're so accomplished. You've done so many amazing things. And now for the past 20 years after leaving Microsoft, you're helping other very accomplished people do even more amazing things. What gave you your drive to do that?
I wish I knew. I think it did. The thing that I've grown up with as one of my mantras is hard work, and that I've worked hard my whole life. That, I guess that's the drive to work hard. I remember, and I think I mentioned this somewhere in the book, that one time I was so engrossed in my homework and working that the power had gone out, which was not an uncommon thing growing up. So I was studying by candlelight, and suddenly I smelled something, and it was my hair that had caught on fire with the candle because I just get so engrossed in what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember that from the book. Was that the culture in your family that everybody just worked really hard? And tell our listeners where you originated from.
Yeah, I grew up in Calcutta, India, and spent the first 20 years of my life there, and then came to the US as a junior transfer student to study computer science.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the culture in India, or maybe just your family, but in general, is it more hardworking than here in the US?
Well, I don't know about comparison to the US. I think there's plenty of hardworking people everywhere. But for my family, for sure, hard work was a big part of our ethos. You get up and you get things done, and you keep going, and sort of persistence. I think that the drive, it's hard to keep that consistently there when you receive setbacks, which of course all of us of a certain age have had. And it's that whole ethic of getting up the next morning and continuing to work at it.
Yeah, for sure. I've noticed culturally in the US, just generally speaking, there's plenty of hard workers. And to your point, every job I've ever had, I was going to be the best at it, whether it was a paper boy delivering papers many years ago or being a dishwasher, it didn't matter.
Yes.
We've kind of lost that culturally, and I hope we get it back for sure. But it's interesting. For me, it's about the value that we create and getting excited and being passionate about that, not sort of sitting back and waiting for the world to kind of impress us. So it's interesting. What do you think's happening? Is it shifting in one direction or the other today? Where would you see that
in terms of the great value?
Yeah, harder working culture or more entitlement culture.
Mm. I'm hesitant to generalize because I see exceptions or differences in everything. But we can notice the vocabulary even that is showing up, like hustle culture, which indicates, well, I'm not part of the hustle culture. I don't want to, do that. So I think that there is more of a shift, and I'm not sure all of it is necessarily bad. I had to learn the hard way through burnout a couple of times, because the first time wasn't enough at great cost to me. That, okay, hard work all the time is not necessarily a great idea either. You've got to balance it with some fallow time where ideas can germinate, your body and your mind can rest too.
What if value creation became cool? It became the culture, and everybody latched onto that. That would be just absolutely incredible. I'm not sure the best way. Do we have a bunch of leaflets we drop and say, hey, please do this, it'll be better?
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny. So a really neat way to think about what you said is not that would be, but that will be. Because I think we're at a tipping point where we're realizing that what's gotten us here will not get us there. And the methods that allowed us to exploit some short-term pursuits. And, we have to look across the whole lens of human history. Short-term can be a couple hundred years, a couple of decades, whatever. It doesn't only mean next quarter. But our short-term thinking has caught up with us. And I don't like to say, however, I do say, we're living in a world that is shaped as much by unintended consequences as it is by anything else. We are dealing with the repercussions of things where short-term thinking is showing now its dark side. So in offering value to the world and creating value in the world, what I really heard you speak about, Lee, was the sense of generosity and really a sense of sort of interbeing, where we come to an awakening where we realize that all of our actions are of consequence, and that if we, think through the consequence, beforehand, we may act with more responsibility, generosity, accountability, a higher offer to the evolution of human meaning that I know everyone longs for in their heart. I really believe that. And then the other thing we do is we start working together in a more connected way where we see ourselves as less as individuals. Right now, I'm doing some research on the rise of individuality in American culture, very specifically in our culture, or Western culture, because our culture has become, largely through technology, I think, the most influential culture on the planet. And the rise of individuality is, you really, based on the research, takes a huge upspike after World War II. And you see this in the way that we developed houses, in the way we even started serving food. I mean, it's just so, my portion for me, was, as I said, I've been lucky to travel at different parts in the world where even, people eating from a collective plate are symbolically and subconsciously interconnecting in ways that, we get our Happy Meal in a bag or whatever, and that's mine, right? So, but the thing about individuality is in the early 60s, there was a Time magazine cover story that was called The Me Generation. And so this me-ness that we have conditioned and culture and created in our society is a very big part of what you're talking about. And coming back to the generosity of interconnection. And now I have to be true to myself because I say, hey, it's all here to teach us, right? It's all resistance training. I really believe that the causes and conditions that have led us to this moment in time are exactly what we need to find the jewel. I don't always feel as hopeful as I would like to feel, yet I always feel hopeful. I recognize that there are dark times. I also recognize that we humans are really good when we pause, when we take a breath, when we look at somebody else in the eyes, when we remain curious using the prefrontal cortex. We are such incredible problem solvers. If that weren't true, we wouldn't be here today. We've made it through 300,000 or more years of things that I know I couldn't survive. Our ancestors made it through adversity because of the very resources still embedded in our beings. And now it's time to expand what those are. They're not about the individualistic chase. They are about the very things we saw in that Blue Planet show, which is being part of something bigger than ourselves in a way that creates connection and even creates happiness as well as well-being and fulfillment.